I'll just do my preamble. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining. So why are we here? The idea of kind of collective organization, I keep coming back to it every single week and trying to articulate it in different ways. And hearing from other people about what they think about it, it always gives me some ideas about how to express it better. But one thing I have noticed, certainly, that people like the, quote, for-profit aspect of what we're trying to do here. So what does that mean? Well, you know, making ends meet is important, obviously speaking. And how we do that is challenging in this world, especially if you're one of those millions and millions of people right now in the world that are sort of struggling to make ends meet because the line of work that they were in dealt with person-to-person contact, and that's something that's been completely halted in most places. So what is it that the Dalten Collective is trying to do in this sense? Well, we're trying to pool our resources together to do something productive in the world. And we're trying to do that in a very specific way. And what I mean by that is we're not trying to innovate in too many different places. We're not trying to innovate, let's say, in governance. We're not trying to do like a holacracy or something like that. But what we are doing is using the power of the internet to find people all over the globe that have similar interests and talents and that can apply those things into specific domains. That, I think, is the thing that is most, gives Dalten some of the best competitive advantage in this sense. And it's also not really a new idea, but those groups that can do this well and do it natively, I think really do have some edge in this sort of for-profit space. And how that looks, meaning what do we actually do with ourselves to try to earn income? You know, I think it's more important that we recognize that we're drawing from a very big talent pool, and that has particular advantages. Being able to meet in these sorts of ways and do it productively has a lot of advantages. And then how we sort of organize to keep ourselves on the same page is really important. And what we choose to apply ourselves to is somewhat less important, but also probably still a lot of fun and excitement. So that's one thing about the for-profit aspect of it. But I did want to touch on that thing that I think to be successful, you have to be innovative in some particular respect. But if you try to be innovative in too many respects, it ends up being a lot to handle. And Dalten is really going to be focused on drawing the best sort of talent that we can, meaning people of like mind from wherever, and then applying that in a particular way that's effective, that's coherent, that feels good to be a part of, and that's the social aspect of it. And then that gets me into what I wanted to talk about today in terms of our agenda. So I broke up today's agenda and I posted this in the notebook on meeting topics. I broke it up into 3 parts: governance, sort of business, and operations. And in the governance section, so Minfel, who's not, yep, he is here. So Minfel posted in one of these, let's say, published notebooks, some stuff and some experience that he's had in some previous organizations doing something similar to what Dalten Collective is trying to do. He posted some really great links about co-op structure. So Jack, could you kind of walk us through what you posted there, what that was about, and what we can be thinking about in terms of either co-op structure specifically, and that I think it was called the Colorado co-op that you'd mentioned that some research had been done, and where you think maybe Dalten should be headed in terms of formal sort of governance.
Yeah, so first of all, I had to reach and asked you for an invite to the group, and I'm not like, I can see it. Do you know if you sent it?
I did, but it can be, I've had experiences where it can be tricky to get back in there.
Okay.
But I'll make sure you get in, don't worry.
Yeah. No. Yeah, so anyway, Yeah, so the main document that I posted was a research that we had the lawyer firm do essentially, and I think like I wasn't involved in in that project. I just got the document sent to me as part of a discussion. I think we tasked them to research only those 3 jurisdictions that were actually mentioned in the documents. So it was Washington, Colorado, and Minnesota, if I recall correctly. Let me see if I have my notes from when I reread them. Right. Yeah, so what's interesting about these 3 specifically is that they have different levels of memberships. So you can have patrons and investors in Minnesota, and they can have, so patrons are people who are actually like supplying some kind of productive input, whereas investors are, well, just investing. And patrons can have additional votes, so all members need not be equal, as is commonly the case in most co-op structures. And Colorado has a similar, similar 2-level system, and Washington as well. So what's interesting about Washington specifically is that you can actually exclude or limit the voting power of particular entities depending on, well, you can define it in the bylaws, but I'm not sure to which extent you can do it, and like how flexible it is with regards to like which kinds of questions you can exclude certain persons from. So all of these allow international members as well. So what is interesting about them is that they allow for a cooperative structure where you can still have equity and dividends. So it's kind of an in-between, almost between the co-op and a limited liability company or something like that. Where Dalten should be headed, I don't know. So far I consider myself more of a bystander than anything else. Like, I don't know where you want to be headed. I posted this mostly as sort of a information of work that we had already done.
Yeah, and I certainly appreciate that. So thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
And I think from my perspective, I'm not trying to recreate the wheel, so to speak.
Right.
So if work has been done, like, yeah, that's great. And I have some of my own experience with co-ops as well, which, for better or worse, is more of a learning experience than anything else, which is still valuable in this case, I think. But let's can maybe go around the room.
How did you think that the Archain co-op in Washington was working?
Well, from a governance perspective, it was just quite dysfunctional, and still is for the most part. But that's because the co-op didn't acknowledge its actual power structure, which is to say the president had the vast majority of the authority. But there was this sort of myth or propagation that it was something more like a holocracy, where it was, collective governance decisions and, a new kind of structure, which it wasn't. And this was clearly defined in the 70s as sort of the tyranny of the unstructured, which is really what happened in Archain, which is what I think would be important to avoid in Dalten, which is to say, our Constitution is 2 things. It's something that's written and there's something that's practiced. And the farther apart the way those 2 things go, the more dysfunctional the organization is. So trying to keep those 2 things in alignment, it makes it far more clear, how things work from the beginning. In terms of like flexibility in ways of like, in terms of like voting structures and equity and all those things, I think it's generally generally sound, meaning the co-op structure that you articulated, Jack, in some of those particular jurisdictions are really great. And we have to be thinking also about the jurisdictions, their attitudes towards projects sort of like Dalten or sort of like blockchains in general, even though Dalten is not a blockchain specific organization and likely won't have any kind of direct blockchain issuance or anything. It certainly could. I don't want to rule that out. And in Washington, the environment is very hostile towards that type of activity, whereas in Colorado, much more positive. I mean, it's not completely positive like in, you know, some other countries in Europe, but I would say Colorado and Wyoming specifically, those two jurisdictions are pretty forward progressive, and actually Delaware is coming along well, I think, as well. So having a co-op that can do equity, that can change the voting parameters of different members sounds really positive to me. I think just for us, we need to be clear, and this is our formation time, like right now, how we want to make this thing work, and then when we write it down and commit to it, that we actually do it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, well, let's try to hear from everybody on this topic. So Rapsith, let's start with you.
Okay, I guess the only concern that I have, I mean, I appreciating what you're saying about how co-ops operate. My concern is more at a federal level and with the issuance, the appearance of the issuance of securities, because I know that that has been a big issue for anything associated with the blockchain or any type of electronic collective in the past. And I think it's really smart to have gone to a firm and, gotten an opinion like this. And I think maybe that would be not just from the perspective of state locationing, but from the perspective of federal opinion writing, getting a formal opinion from an attorney of merit in this kind of context. And after we have a good understanding of what we want the structure to be, would be a good thing to do.
Okay. Sarpin, let me hand it over to you.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I mean, I'm not too terribly opinionated here about exactly how, but like, I mean, I'm sort of eager to definitely like run through it, like sort of like establish some things. I guess like with the security thing, I think it's if I understand correctly, it's only if you sell them. So it's like if we're like sort of like seeking like investment like outside of like the standard like investment process, like that we risk like security problems. So it's like you have to be accredited or like only so much like above below like that who aren't accredited and so on. And, like there's like I think you have to like obey those rules. But I think you can like issue tokens for like within those constraints. I'm pretty sure. But you just have to do like KYC and accreditation and stuff like that. But I'm also not convinced that like we necessarily need to take investment or that like we even like need to broach that topic. And then we can just like rather straightforwardly deal with equity ourselves or perhaps maybe some other structure that but yeah, there's maybe like just a couple of thoughts.
Great, thanks. Okay, Bartek, off to you.
Well, I'm from outside the U.S. What I've heard is that, for example, Switzerland has been an interesting place for blockchain-based projects. So I don't know if that's in the options. but it may be worth exploring, different locations outside of the
Mhm.
U.S. if this could be of interest.
Certainly.
My
Cool. Well,
impression,
yeah, go ahead.
they're like
Mhm.
extremely like high like legal overhead, and like my impression with like the blockchain Swiss stuff was like basically the projects who like sort of like the big Chungus meme. It's like they just were like gonna like raise a bunch of money, and it's like, but like you like pay like hundreds of thousands of dollars of like Swiss legal fees, like you can keep like your accounts open and like raise like absurd amounts of money and whatever. It's like
Yeah, for example, but then for example, places like Malta then is a less known place, but still houses a lot of blockchain project, like also these recent contracts about trading securities. I think a lot of things is going on there. So, by the way, I know a lawyer here in Milan who's involved in Maltese, in these kind of Maltese issues. So I could talk to him and tell him more about the Dalten Collective, about what kind of ideas. And since he's a friend, I think he can just give me some ideas.
Sure, if you're willing.
yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, and from my perspective, I mean, I think everything everybody has said is completely, legitimate. We're currently running on a zero cost organization. We have like nothing in terms of expenses, that means we have an infinite runway. So great, right? So I think that's also part of our advantage. We can run very lean. Very little infrastructure, physical infrastructure needed or anything like that. But there's going to be some need to do some legal work at some point, right? So we might even think about trying to actually earn some revenue before we even get that far down. So this is still, early, but having options, I generally like them, but I think there's no real reason, or I'm not thinking about raising equity or raising funds through equity, but it's nice to have the option, maybe in a few years, that might be far more important than it, seems to be now. So I think it's very important that the people who are committed have equity in whatever this is. That's really important to me. Part of the shared ownership, as well as cash flow, of course. So looking at those things, I think keeping this on the back burner, so to speak, and learning from other people, getting some quality advice, as much as we can. That's probably the way to move forward. But I do think the one thing we should sort of commit to is like a unanimous decision when the time comes. I don't think this thing about how to structure, because once it's sort of structured and put in sort of, it becomes far more real in the sense of like, there's actual bylaws, there's legal work to be maintained and a structure to be followed. That's a real commitment, and we all really need to get behind it. And if it's not, for the most part, a consensus decision, it doesn't seem like it's the right move. So what do people think about, kind of keeping this on the back burner, watching it, but when we're ready to actually do something about it, like it's got to be, for the most part, a unanimous decision. I think that's a good idea.
I think that you make a lot of sense in suggesting that we should get to revenue before we get to bylaws, because the one should feed the second, to allow us to pay for that without, like, maintaining corporate dues and things like that is it's not costly, but it's not free either. And so without a revenue source, doing it seems unnecessary.
Mm-hmm. Though I should say, I don't want to do this completely informally either, but I think, yes, we need some money, but we should write something down.
Or let's say at least a plan for money before, like, I would be fine with saying, okay, we have a concrete plan of what we want to try, let us incorporate and then try that. I think that we're fine with a runway until we get to something like that point.
Yeah, makes sense. Cool.
And then unanimity, I'm fine with too. Sorry.
What was that last word?
Unanimity. I think that it's fine to.
Unanimity,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, maybe I'll ask it in a slightly different way. Is there anybody who thinks unanimity is a bad idea?
Not at this stage, no.
Okay,
No.
cool. Yeah, I think we're small enough now that this should be pretty straightforward, actually. And this, yeah, cool. All right, so that's kind of what I wanted to talk about in terms of governance. Well, actually, with one quick caveat. So I did have a chance to put out our first podcast. So this was a discussion that I had with Nathan Schneider. Nathan is he's a media studies professor, assistant professor at the University of Colorado Boulder, and been doing a lot of research and thought into this sort of space for quite a number of years. And I thought we had a pretty good conversation. And a lot of his advice, if you haven't listened to the podcast, it's about an hour, but I think it's a good conversation. A lot of his advice is that, a lot of governance structures are fairly sort of well known and understood, and there's no real need to try to invent something new. Not that trying to invent something new is not, yes, people should experiment with things like holacracy, and he is very interested in that. But if you're just starting a project and want to get moving and do something in the world, pick something that exists. And it's surprising how often people neglect simple governance structures and then wind up in places of pretty deep conflict. That's sort of the cliff notes of that conversation. But one thing he did say, which often works, and you see this pattern up again, is that sort of like a circle of accountability, where you have three sort of bodies that sort of check each other, and you can see this sort of in U.S. style of governance, where there's three branches of governance or branches of government, and it works well because if you only have two bodies, then they can kind of stalemate each other. But once you add that third, that's sort of the most dynamic system you can have without this sort of explosion of too many other things, which I thought was interesting. But it doesn't have to be like a executive, judicial, and congressional or something like that. It can be just any checks on authority and power, kind of like a three-legged stool is a good idea. But yeah, on that note though, on the note about the podcast, so I had a lot of fun doing it, and so I really do want to keep going with this. Eric Newton has accepted, so he's going to do a little podcast about sort of relationships. And what I find very interesting about his particular perspective on relationships is specifically relationships who have gone through divorce and then come back together, which I think is particularly interesting because it is not a common pattern. And so there might be some interesting little nugget of truth in that sort of experience. And I'm looking for other sort of hosts. I think the host of the Zion 2.0 podcast, he's totally into doing something about doing something with me, and then we'll see sort of where it goes. But if you guys have got either leads or ideas that you want to, go ahead and post them into that podcast idea notebook that we've got, and I'll go ahead and follow them up as best I can. But as it is, I'll just keep following up and try to get one out every week for everybody to hear and listen to. Not sure exactly when, meaning what day of the week, but I'll post everything in the links collection, of course, and then you can always just subscribe on iTunes or something like that. Feel very much like the the YouTuber, right? Like
and subscribe.
Like and subscribe. But we're producing content, so that's kind of neat. All right, next on to actual business. So there was an idea posted about participating in the upcoming Urbit hackathon. Rapsif, I think this was your idea, right?
Yeah, I mentioned it.
Okay, and then, but as far as I can tell, the only person on the call or in the collective, for the most part, that can write any hoon is Sarpin.
I can write bad hoon. I mean, let's give me credit there.
I signed up.
Okay.
Rasbif, are you on the Hoon School in the next batch?
I did it at the end of 2019, so I did complete Hoon School also, so I can write moderately bad code even.
Okay. Yeah, I'm doing it next. So
cool.
Oh, that's good. at least, and I tried, and I got 3/4 of the way through, but I didn't finish.
Robness can write
Well,
code too.
yeah, he's a core
he's
dev,
busy.
though. He doesn't count.
Oh yeah, that's fair.
But what I was thinking, I don't know if this would be fun or not, but if we did want to participate in the hackathon, I think really it should be Christian's decision, because he'd be doing the heavy lifting. And what we could bring in is a couple different things, either some project management around it or any other auxiliary sort of tasks that need to be completed, but also as a learning event to sort of brush up on what we can do and how we can do it. I think I've got enough of a basic understanding that if Christian, if you sort of narrated what you were doing, I think that would be a lot of fun too, even if it didn't really go anywhere.
Yeah, sure, certainly. If I do it, I would definitely, I would also like to, anybody who wants to, help in any way that they can. I'm also peer programming with Rod stuff, I think would be great. So, what is the timeline for it exactly?
It's the 4th of April, right? Wasn't it the 3rd of? I'm sorry, the 4th of May, 3rd of April through the 4th of May.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Hmm.
But there's some pretty hefty star rewards as part of this. Something like, I think I saw 28 stars are going to be apportioned out to the people who put stuff in. And if we did this, that would go towards, quote, the Dalten treasury, unless Sarpin, you wanted to have some portion of that held aside for your personal use.
Well, I've also got working on the ETH ABI stuff, which I'm just today finally got some around to properly beginning with what I have spec'd out. So I've got some stars coming in. I'm just thinking if in terms of bandwidth, what I can imagine. But yeah, I'm thinking something like that might be possible. It's also possible that there's other people I could maybe mobilize if there's a bit of if I'm able to extend some upside to it, because I'm not I know some other developers. Yeah, just as some thoughts.
Sure. Well, I'd certainly be interested in collaborating with the people and as long as we can come to an agreement about sort of how to share any winnings, then that should be fine. It would be fun if we can add to the coffers, I think, but more than anything, I just think it'd be cool to have something in Dalten other than just Dalten itself. Just makes it a little bit more real if it has something else in there.
Yeah, definitely agreed.
Okay. But it should be proportional to effort, and that's totally cool with me. So for next steps here, so Rapsif, there's an application, right, that needs to be filled out if we actually want to do it.
Yeah, I was just looking for it. I'll have to find the link to it, but yeah.
Okay. I suppose there's no harm in applying, even if we don't participate. So we might as well, sign up. And then so you posted one idea, Rapsif, about what we could work on. There might be something, maybe we could do a brainstorm meeting too, to come up with maybe something that's relatively scoped well enough that it's not going to end up being too big, but at least is something that we can participate in with the hackathon.
And I think bearing in mind the developments that we have so far, like Sarpin, your file explorer, if that's something you wanted to push further or something like that, it would be prudent to start there.
Yeah, that or the AO.
Yeah.
Because I've got it essentially working on for a single user. I've got it working locally. I just have to implement the peer-to-peer stuff basically. Yeah. That would potentially be. Yeah, and we could do like operational stuff with that, you know, and
Yeah.
sort of accrue like knowledge and information, like organize it, because it's essentially just like it's like a recursive card-based system. So like card can have a tag, and it has unique children, which are also cards, and like that's effectively it. But then it's like you've got like you could have like a library that's like attached to a group, like an Urbit group, um, and basically like you could like subscribe to libraries, and like you could like maybe like send cards from like a library, like some other library to like another library, or like maybe like send cards to an individual within the context of like a library, like which is kind of effectively like a group, you know, like or like a group's an instance of like a library within a group, you know.
Maybe we could ask Thomas
do other things
to
as
do
well.
some UI stuff too. All right.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, cool.
Yeah, because I can't UI for my life.
Cool. All right. Well, let's just pick that up over the course of the week, and let's see. Yeah. Well, I guess then the actual action item is to apply. So Rapsif, if you can find the link and then just post it in there, I can actually fill up or I'll find it eventually too. But if you find it before me, post it into the Dalten Collective and
Yep, I think I got it right here.
fill it out. Cool. All right. So the next thing, that I wanted to discuss is we have a guest speaker next week. So Mark Wilcox out of 21E8 he agreed for the hefty fee of $2.18. I guess that was it, something like that, for a fee, to come and explain what he's been working on and how we might be able to use it, or how we might be able to participate if we want to. But Mark is in New Zealand, and so even right now is a bit early for him. So we're going to do it after the meeting, the regularly scheduled meeting. And so if we don't go in an entire hour, it will just be, we'll stop and then take a break and then pick up again at 2 p.m. Pacific time. And that's when he'll join us, give a little bit of a presentation. And then the goal for that presentation is to want people to feel like they have a better understanding about what he's trying to do with his project, and if that's something we want to participate in, meaning like actually install the miner and mine these sort of magic numbers. And just briefly, my understanding about this is that it's a protocol on top of Bitcoin, as they would say, even though this is Bitcoin SV specifically we're talking about, where you can offer like proof of work for storage and maybe some other services. So that's kind of like an interesting idea. Like, one thing I've always thought was really an unanswered question in Bitcoin SV was who's going to store data, and this might be an answer to something like who's going to store it. Meaning, if there's a protocol that allows you to actually pay for storage, then you can sort of guarantee that your data is going to be on the blockchain for as long as you can pay for it, at least. But the people mining those numbers, those identifiers, well, there's going to be mining rewards associated with that. So just like any other protocol, if it's successful, if you're in there early, then it's a potential, good use of resources. So that's next week. If there are any questions you want specifically, we can drop them into, let's see, where's a good place? Probably meeting topics for next week. That'll be good. Last thing I have on the list is operations. So Zoom specifically has been identified many times in the news recently as being problematic. There are many other options. So just wanted to put that out to the group. Should we ditch Zoom and go to something else?
Yes. I mean, I'm rather emphatic about it. It looks pretty horrible from what I've seen, what Zoom is and does.
Okay.
I am personally a huge fan of Jitsi because, like, you literally
me too.
just, like, So yeah, okay. So but you just it's nice. It's just you can like make a custom name like on the fly. It's great. Like meet.jit.si/ you just like type in whatever and you send that to people. It's great.
Okay. Anybody else? Anybody think they want to stay on Zoom? Yeah, Zoom is great. We should just live with it.
No, Jitsi is great.
Okay. All right. So next meeting will be on Jitsi. I will post that link internally because even though Jitsi is better than Zoom, if you post a public link, you're probably still going to get bombed. I don't want that. But yeah, we'll use Jitsi next time, and I will post that into the chat and everything, and also put something on Twitter about that we're moving to Jitsi, to what the link is. But I'm probably not going to make it just the Dalten Collective because that might be a little bit too easy to guess. So I'll make it something nice and readable, but not too easy.
I usually just
Is there anything else anybody want to talk about?
Keyboard.
What was that?
I usually just mash buttons on the keyboard, like generate some homegrown entropy.
Okay, yeah, I could do that. Cool. Well, thanks everybody, and of course, in this time of great weirdness, stay safe. Wash your hands.
Yeah, definitely.
See you next week.
All right, great call, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.